So I just want to take a moment and talk a little bit about how you might apply an effect kind of similar to this motion tracking on this title here, where it's receiving its motion information from the video itself. And it's pretty simple using the tools, if sometimes a little bit finicky. And so I just wanted to point out basically how you might do it and what to watch out for as you're doing this. So the first thing that we want is a video source that is in your composition, and I just have this video of Connor, and we'll make a little title sequence for him. And we're just going to start off by saying track motion, and that's going to give us these track points. And so it'll start off with 2 separate track points, and I have done this several times previously just to make sure that it operates the way that it should. So it automatically put it exactly where I want it to be, but you can always just grab the edge of this, and when your pointer turns white there, that's when when it's grabbing the edge of it, and you can put this anywhere. So if we wanted to track the green one, we could put it there, the red one we could put it here. The blue one is perfect because it doesn't move terribly far to the left or right. And so there are 3 elements to this. The first one is trying to determine the pixel, so it's good to find a place that has high contrast. The next one is trying to read the contrast within that area and determine where that pixel might next end up. And then this one is going to search the motion of the entire area in order to determine where the entire set of pixels might end up going. So the first step will be to make this long and tall, very specifically for this shot, because he's moving it vertically up into the shot, but not very much to the side. So we can save on basically computing power by making it long and tall. And then from there, we can just say analyze forward, and it's going to try its best to track it, and it usually does a pretty good job. Especially with small, not intense motion in this direction, which it looks like it did it just about perfectly. There might be one little jump here that is a little bit off, but I think that looks good enough for me. And so from here, we're going to want to analyze backwards. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky because there's a lot more drastic motion in the vertical y axis motion. So it may lose it pretty quickly. So we're just going to look at our whole composition there and analyze backwards and see how well this holds up. And yeah, it lost it pretty early on. So let's go to the first frame that has an incorrect placement, and we're just going to correct it. Easy enough. You just grab it once it turns white, drag it down, and we're good to go. And then you can analyze 1 frame forward or 1 frame backwards. And so it did an okay job with that one, if a little bit low. And then we'll go 1 more. Did a pretty good job with that. Did a really good job with that one. And wow, that was actually great. And then from here on out, there is no point to track. So we actually don't need the rest of this. If you did analyze all the way to the beginning, it'll help if you just delete them by dropping this down and then highlighting any of the ones that you might want to delete, which would be all of these over here. And so now we have a fully tracked, ready to record video. And I'm just trying to make sure that all this motion is fairly consistent. If you have any large jumps, then it might look inconsistent once we have it in place, but that looks pretty close to me. So the next thing we want to do is get something to track, and I almost always use a null object when I'm tracking, and the reason is that null object can be an adapter basically to whatever thing you're adding. Functionally, we're giving all of these position data directly to the thing that we want to track. And if we do that, then we can't actually manually determine where that thing that we're tracking will end up on the composition. So if you use a null object and then create a parent-child relationship between the null object and your text layer, then you can place the text layer easily wherever you want in the screen, and then feed the location data all the way up to the text layer with relatively no issue. And oftentimes, if you do that and then you determine that you don't like the style of it, you have to sort of disconnect all the motion trackers from your text layer and then reattach them, which if you use a null object, you don't need to do. It'll just be a lot faster this way. So the next step will be to edit the target, and you just want your target to be your null layer, and hit OK and then hit apply, and it'll give you a drop down determining whether you want your X and Y axis, your X only or your Y only. And in this case, I want my X and Y axis because I want that natural back and forth motion. And so that applied to my null object, and if I drop that down, we'll see identical keyframing information here. And so I can drop that out, and I don't need to pay attention to that. So the final thing we want to do is give them a title. So if we go up to our text tool, we can just click anywhere and say Connor. And then we can situate it vaguely where we want it. And so eventually we want it to live about there, right? But the thing is that it's going to move up into place. So what I would do is get a loose idea of how far this null object layer is moving from beginning to end. And there we go, roughly about that distance. And I would change this distance to be about that amount. So I might put it around there. And then I can just create a parent-child relationship with it. And that was backwards, I'm sorry. I want this to be none, and then I want this to go up to the null object. And so now once I play it back, it'll move consistently, which is lovely, but it reset my location data. And I think that was because of my mistake of creating a parent-child relationship between my text data, my text and my null in the backwards direction. So if I set that up, set that to be there, I play it back, it's still doing that. Any which way, this is why we have a null object. I can always just grab this and drag it up, and then the motion will still maintain. And so that's a little bit far, so I can put it down there, and that looks pretty good. Now I run into this issue where it's actually being picked up here, so it's just kind of sitting at his shoulder up until that point. So I actually want to reveal this because it's a text reveal. So I'm going to apply animation directly to this text layer. I could do it to the null object layer, but since we already have so much information on there, it just seems logically easy to me to apply it to my text layer. So I'm going to set my position there to be my start point for all of this, and I'm going to have it fly up from that point. And from right there, now we have one of two different places. It flies into screen, and then it gets picked up by the motion trackers at this point, which looks pretty good, but it looks a little bit mechanical as it's coming up. So actually what I also want to add to it is an opacity reveal of maybe about halfway up. So around there or there, I will fade this out entirely. And so now what it'll do is it'll fade right in, and then it'll get picked up by our motion tracker, which looks pretty good to me. And so that's how you might go about doing a single point tracking on a video with motion trackers. There are several other choices when you're using the motion tracker that you should be aware of, which are your, I gotta open this up and take a look. If I hit track motion, it'll give me these several different options: parallel corner pin and perspective corner pin, raw, and stabilize. This is if you wanted to stabilize a camera around a singular object. But these two are more for cases in which you have a TV in their background, or a sign, or you're moving a phone screen back and forth and you want to map an image directly onto that phone screen or onto that sign and use that information to move three-dimensionally in space, or as if it were to stay in place as you're moving your camera forward and back. There are some functions that you can do with each of those when you're using them with your subject moving, but more often than not, you'll just end up wanting to use the transform function, which is a single pin. The other thing to note is when you use either your perspective or your parallel corner pin, it gives you 4 tracking points, and that just means that there are 4 potential places for it to need sort of personalized tracking information, which will just take considerably longer. And so those are just things to be aware of. Otherwise, it is an extraordinarily powerful tool for creating really, really simple, if effective graphics.